time will be determined, so keep an eye out on the Church Center app and on our website for more information.
Good morning. It's so good to be here. Is my mic too hot? Hopefully not. So, good morning, everyone. I'm so grateful to be here, and I really pray that it's really good for me to be here extra because I'm coming out of another quarantine, and I just feel like, oh my gosh, I get to go outside, and it's really nice. It's you feel like you've been in house arrest if you just forced to stay home and learn to love every corner of your house. It gets really familiar. But it's good to be here, and I pray that God will really speak to us during this time, and He will speak to you, and He will speak to me. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Paul, and I work part-time here at Journey as worship and praise coordinator, and I also work part-time with InnoVarsity. And this morning, I'm going to talk about just this topic of Sabbath and rest. And I know that, for all of us, we've been a year and a half into this pandemic, where our lives were very rudely disrupted. And I really think that this COVID time, it's going to be a marker in our human timeline. Like, it's going to be a huge milestone where entire world, right, like had experienced what it's like to live through a pandemic. And we have these markers. We read them in history books. We just get to live in it right now. But, right, have you considered that this complete disruption of our lives, that maybe God had intended it, and He actually has, through this disruption, that He has a lesson for us, that He's trying to get our attention, to speak to us about something that's very important to Him and it's important to us. Right? I mean, similar to probably many of you when this pandemic first hit, and I was kicking and screaming and just waiting for things to go back to the way they used to be. I was just hoping that things will quickly get back to, we were thinking like, oh, 2 weeks it'll be over, 3 weeks it'll be over. We're a year and a half into it. But then, like, as this got longer and longer and longer, I started to have a different fear. I started to have the fear that, I'm realizing that the entire world, like globally, is changing. The world is changing around me, and I had this fear that maybe, what if I come out of this pandemic having been the same person? I go through this major event in my life, and I'm still the same person that I was before. And what if I go through this and I miss God's urgent invitation for me to hear Him and for me to experience Him more fully and to get to know Him and to be more like Him? What if I miss that? And I think I started to grow that desperate desire to not come out of this and feel like, I don't know, that was just a weird thing, and let's just move on. And I really wanted to grasp and hold on to the things that God has for us in this time. And I think that's maybe a way for us to be present here. So the Israelites in the Bible, they weren't, life disruptions were new to them. They experienced many, many different life-altering disruptions in their lives. And one of them was their time in the desert. So we complain about a year and a half of pandemic disruption or 2 weeks of house arrest, but they dealt with 40 years of being physically displaced, wandering in the wilderness, having to be dependent on their food and their survival, feeling powerless, and just hopelessly and helplessly dependent on God. 40 years of that. And today, I think we're going to look at why God chose that time of just wandering through the desert to command His people to observe Sabbath and observe rest. Like why He chose that time to do that, and this command to stop and to have a rhythm of rest, and how that invitation of rest He might have for us today. So let's take a look We're going to look at the portion of scripture in Deuteronomy, and this part of the Bible we're about to read it's totally different time than now, right? This is ancient Israelites, and it's in this book of Deuteronomy, and God used this guy named Moses to rescue the people of Israel from enslavement in Egypt. They've been enslaved in Egypt for over 400 years. And afterwards, God used this guy named Moses to rescue them. And after he rescued them, that's when the beginning of the 40 years of journey through the desert started. And at the beginning of the journey, God gave them 10 commandments, right? And then after the journey, Moses reminds them of the 10 commandments that God gave as they exit the wandering around in the wilderness. As they enter into the promised land, Moses reminds them again. That's why the book is called Deuteronomy. It means second law. So he's giving it to them the second time, and it's a reminder. And it's a reminder that they're a nation who have been rescued by God. And it's a reminder that they would not lose the things that God gave them, and they would not lose who they are as they exit the wilderness, as they enter into the world, right? And of the 10 commandments, we're only going to focus on one thing. We're going to look at the one command, which is to observe Sabbath. And that's the fourth command. So let's read it. I'm going to read Deuteronomy 5, verses 12 through 15. Observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, as the Lord your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your ox, your donkey, or any of your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. So, today I'm going to talk about basically three things. What is Sabbath? And then I'm going to talk about why should we observe Sabbath? And then I'll share a little bit about kind of like my obstacles that I see in my life, why it's difficult to actually observe the Sabbath. So the first thing about Sabbath, the term Sabbath in Hebrew, in its original language, it just means to stop or to cease. It shares the same root word as stop, or cease, right? So it makes sense that it's a day of ceasing of your normal work or your usual activities. Right? A good example is how in the Bible, God created the universe. He created the universe and everything that's in it in 6 days. And on the seventh day, he stopped creating, right? So it was a day of stopping, day of ceasing. He ceased to create. So that day became the seventh day and the Sabbath day, right? And the funny thing is, even just as we read here, the Bible really doesn't describe then what you should do. It just says stop doing work, but it doesn't really give you details of like, okay, and then on the Sabbath day, these are the things that you should do. And the Bible doesn't put a lot of investment in defining exactly what that is. But just because the Bible doesn't define it doesn't mean people try to define it, right? So many times, there's even times with Jesus, there were many teachers of the law, people who knew the Bible really well, who tried to define what that should be, what you should do and what you shouldn't do, what you should wear, what you shouldn't wear, what you should say, what you shouldn't say, right? They tried to define it, and Jesus confronts that as he walked along this earth. He confronted because they missed the point. They missed the point of what the Sabbath was all about. Because when God gave these Israelites this weekly rhythm of complete dependence on God for his provisions, it was really about their identity. And that was a time where they were supposed to enjoy God's presence and enjoy the presence of each other. And observing Sabbath was meant to be a reminder that they're no longer slaves, laboring 7 days a week in the Egypt. It was supposed to reminder that they're actually freed people. It was a mark of freedom to observe Sabbath. A lot of times we look at laws or rules and we're like, oh, that's kind of a mark of slavery. But in this case, it's the opposite. It was actually freed people who were given this beautiful law to rest because they were freed. So it was a law. It's a mark of freedom and it's a mark of dependence. Mark of dependence that God is the one who's providing for you, not your own power and your own strength. Second, observing Sabbath was a serious thing. I know it's confusing and it doesn't feel like that, but I mean, how many of you think that murder is serious? Right? I mean, it's easy to agree that the murder is something that's very serious. But think about that. Think about this, that God, this God of Israel, he put, right, observe the Sabbath day on the same list with do not murder. So why is it that we take murder so seriously, kind of universally, yet we can constantly ignore God's command to rest? This one pastor, John Mark Comer, puts it this way. He says the Sabbath is the only one of the 10 commandments that Christians in America brag about breaking. Right? It's the only one of 10 commandments, whether we know it or not, we brag about breaking. It's when we say things like, hey, guess what? I just pulled an all-nighter. With a little bit of pride, I was able to do it. How I worked 10 days in a row straight. Or when we say, how are you? Oh, I'm great. I'm busy, right? Our response is busyness. In those moments, whether we know it or not, maybe subconsciously, maybe we're bragging that we can break this law, and it's totally fine. There's no consequences for us or for other people. So yeah, Sabbath it's serious. It's on the same list. Third thing is that observing Sabbath was not about just slacking off. I mean, the whole thing is about rest. So it sounds like, okay, rest sounds great. Maybe it's just giving people excuse to slack off, but it's not. If you read it carefully, it says that for the 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. It wasn't not finishing your work. Observing Sabbath didn't mean that they just got to, do only 6 days of work while everyone else did 7 days of work. They just finished 7 days of work in 6 days. They did more work during those times. They prepared for the Sabbath day by working really hard because it was supposed to be something that was worth fighting for, right? It's not like you slack off on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then Saturday you think about doing some work, and then you just kind of forget about it. Maybe life happens to you, and then come Sunday, you're like, well, God told me to rest, so I'm not going to do it, right? That's not the picture that God is drawing up for us here, right? And I think about this, the best way I can think about is, I love going on vacations, especially I love going camping. I don't know about you, but when I think about it, it takes work. It takes a lot of work to carve out time to go on vacation, right? You need to get your stuff done before so that when you're gone, right, things aren't just falling apart. It's that effort that you take, the work that you put in to get all that work done so that when I go camping, you know what? I brought everything. I brought my food. I brought, all the ways that I can hang and all the delicious drinks or whatever. And I just get to relax and rest. I don't bring work though. I can't. They don't even have service when I go camping. So you can't zoom in or whatever. It's just that you can't. So you have to prepare early. So it takes work, but it's worth it. It's 100% worth it. And that's what Sabbath was meant to be. It's not an excuse to be lazy. And it's not resting while others do your work for you, right? God commanded everyone to rest. It included servants, included the children. There's no that no one was supposed to do work. Everyone, right? It's not about dumping your work on others so that you can rest. It's about everyone working hard so that everyone can enjoy the rest that God had given them. And the fourth thing about Sabbath is that, and really all of the Ten Commandments, it only makes sense in the context of a loving relationship. I'm not just talking about, when I say loving relationship, immediately in all of our minds, something pops into head because we're so inundated with this, like our version of what love means, right? But instead of our Western culture's view of what love is, in the biblical time and in their culture, love meant commitment and faithfulness. God was going to be committed to his people no matter how far they're gone. And God was going to demonstrate that commitment, and he was going to sacrifice to show that, right? So he rescues these people, and it was in that committed relationship that these kind of rules and laws make sense. And without that loving relationship, these all start to break apart. And I think that's a lot of people's experience with rules and laws, right? Without relationship, it just becomes a set of things that gives you fear. Um, if we go back a few verses, this is what God says before he gives 10 commandments. He says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Right? I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. This is not an image of a slave master trying to micromanage his people for his own gain. No, this is a God who loves his people, who rescued them because he heard their cries. From over 400 years of slavery, I really can't understand that. Like, I can say the words pains and sufferings of 400 years of slavery, but it's really hard to fathom and really understand the weight of that, right? Like, think about it. It's been less than 300 years since the European settlers declared independence in America, right? And I don't even know what that was like. I can't even understand what 300 years is like. But 400 years of slavery, think about the type of pain. It's not even just one person's, right? It's generational pain. It's a pain that gets passed down, and the people who are carrying that, and God heard their cries. And they're in that kind of relationship. And he rescued them, and wouldn't it bring in your heart and in your mind this sense of eternal gratitude if that happened to you? And what about you? Like, have you ever experienced that kind of rescue from God in your own life? You didn't live 400 years, but maybe you do carry generational pains and things that your fathers and your parents and your parents' parents have carried that have come to you. Maybe you experience the effects of those sins. Maybe you have pains and sufferings that you feel like it felt hopeless, and God rescued you from that. Have you ever had that experience? Before I became a Christian, I felt like God was just full of this sets of rules and laws that really sucks the fun out of life. Like, he was just there to tell me what not to do. That's what it felt like to me. And all these rules, they just brought me fear. They brought me shame and guilt and anxiety. I had zero desire to tell people to become Christians. Because for me, if my experience is shame and guilt and anxiety, why would I invite someone into that? But and also added to that, it was my understanding at the time that in order for me to get out of the shame and guilt and anxiety, I just had to work extra hard. Like, I had to be extra good. But like, as I got older and older, I pretty much realized that there's not enough days in this world for me to right the wrongs that I've committed in this world, right? There's just not enough days for me to undo that. So only option for me was just hopelessness. There is no hope. And it's not a fun place to be in. And just like God heard the cries and he saw the pains of the Israelites, like God rescues me because I knew there was a moment when I knew that he saw my pain and he heard my cries. And God felt not distant, but he felt close. And I truly believe that he knew the pains and sufferings that I experienced. And just like he rescued the Israelites, he rescued me. And he rescued me from this burden of trying to live out this, like you can make it if you just try hard enough. And being free from that is a really good feeling. And it's right. Jesus offered that to me. And even though I know I don't deserve that. And when I fully put my trust in Jesus and what he did on the cross and his death and resurrection, it's that experience of freedom, grace, and forgiveness, and burdens and that's what he offers to us. And it's like, have you ever had a conflict with someone that you love? And not just like a little, what should we eat? And then you get into a fight. But like the type of conflict that you feel like your relationship is in jeopardy, right? And the best way that I can describe this feeling is like when that conflict that I felt like is jeopardizing my relationship with the person that I love is being resolved. And that tension gets resolved. You just let out this sigh of relief. And when you sleep that night, you know in your heart and in your mind and in your soul that between me and that person, we are okay. Like our relationship is okay and I can sleep in relief. But when it's not, that's every night of just tossing and turning and wondering, like, what's the thing that's gonna completely sever this relationship, right? And that's what it feels like to be in that right relationship with God. Through Jesus, we get to have that moment when this uncertainty becomes very clear to us. That's what I experienced. That I think is the best way to explain it or describe it, right? And that gave me this eternal gratitude that I have towards God that I didn't have before. If there's any of you, right, listening, whether on YouTube or here, you feel like I was describing your relationship with God when I said my relationship with God was just something that caused fear and shame and guilt, felt hopeless. I really believe that God wants to speak to you today. He wants to free you from that uncertainty and anxiety today. And if you feel like that's you, I just want to pause this moment to just pray for you because it's really good. I'll pray for you if you feel like that's you. God, God created this universe. We talked about what Sabbath is. We're going to talk about why should we observe it, right? For one, our act of observing Sabbath is a gesture of us accepting our limitations as human beings. And we're saying we're limited and we're not gods. We're finite and God is infinite. submitting ourselves to God and depending on His unlimited power and provision. That's what we're doing when we observe Sabbath. On the contrary, right, when we just work without resting, work without stopping, we ignore God's invitation to rest, it's like saying we're gods. We're limitless. We can do whatever we want. I think this is why Sabbath is one of the lessons that God has for us during our time in COVID, right? And even before the disruption, like before the disruption of this pandemic, life was just humming along. We were busy with our things, with our works, with our to-do lists, with the things that we need to get done, right? And it makes us think about the next task after the next task, and it makes us live in the future and not in the present. And God maybe He cared for us so much that He caused a break, forced it so that we can experience what it's like to rest, right? I don't know about you, but I had that moment when I was, right, like many of us couldn't work the way that we used to. And there was a gap where I was like, I can't go to work. I'm stuck at home. And there's nothing else I can do. I was literally feeling, it felt like God was like forcing me to just stop and rest. And my life slowed down. And I started to think about things that I saw around the house and the people that I was with, right? That's all I had. My world just got so small. And it helped me to rest. And it helped me to realize things that I didn't realize before, right? Because when we were just humming along, I was trading my mental, my physical, and spiritual health and acted like I was just limitless. I could just do whatever, right? And I didn't even understand the toll that it had on my life. And I think that's God's invitation for us today to really experience the blessing of rest. And because I'll be honest, you can be forced rest, but you can kind of not rest. You can continue to find a way to keep working and to ignore that call, right? Um, And one thing that I learned during the time of pandemic was this sweet, like long walks with my wife, Rachel. We would go on. We have a park right next to us, so we've been able to go on long walks together. And it's this experience of being really fully present with each other. We didn't care about like other things, but we were just able to be present, and we were able to talk to each other, and we were able to connect. And I think that's why we observe Sabbath, so that we can experience that kind of like walking in the park, being fully present with God and with each other. That's what God has for us today. And to experience the limitless God as a limited human being. That's the generosity that we get to experience. That's why we observe Sabbath. The other thing is, it's actually we observe Sabbath so that other people will know God. I know it's weird, right? What does observing Sabbath have anything to do with other people knowing who God is? But if you think about it, God intended for the Israelites to be blessed so that they could be blessing to others. That was the intention of God from the very get-go, beginning of their relationship. And one of the main reasons why God gave these 10 commandments was so that as they enter into a new place and as they're surrounded by different nations, that through them, those different nations would be blessed, that they would know God and they would experience the blessings of rest, things like rest, just as God has commanded them. And take a look at chapter 4. Earlier, Moses speaks to people about this, right? This is in verse 5, it says, "See, I have taught you decrees and laws as the Lord my God commanded me, so that you may follow them in the land you're entering to take possession of it. Observe them carefully, for this will show your wisdom and understanding to the nations, who will hear about all these decrees and say, 'Surely this great nation is wise and understanding people.' What other nation is so great as to have their gods near them the way the Lord our God is near to us whenever we pray to Him? And what other nation is so great as to have such righteous decrees and laws as this body of laws I am setting before you today?" As you can see here, their observance of God's command was a way for other people to know who God is and how amazing He is, because they would be like, what kind of amazing God would give you these kind of laws and rules? Let me tell you about my God and what kind of laws and rules he has for me, right? They would be able to compare and see and understand who this God is. If we go back to the command itself, right? Isn't it really interesting that God included any foreigner residing in your towns as a part of the command? It wasn't just the Israelites. He meant this rest for everyone. What do you think would have been the experience, right? Put yourself in the shoes of a foreigner coming into the camp of Israelites and they're just resting one day. You try to go to the bank and they're like, it's not open. You try to do whatever and they're like, it's not open. We're just resting today. Like, what kind of experience would that be for you? And just so you know, right, during this time, biblical times, like the concept of resting one day was completely foreign. It's different, right? From 2,000 years later, us looking back, or even more than 2,000, like us looking back into that culture, it's a little different because we live in a world where we barely work 5 days and then we take 2 days off, right? But back then, most of the agricultural cultures, right? Like they had to work 7 days a week. There's no concept of stopping work because it directly meant you had to work that day to eat to that day's portion of food. So it didn't make any sense for them to rest. So if you're that foreigner living that life, it would be so weird and it would be a radical thing to learn. What? Like you get to rest one day and not work and still survive, and your God provides for you? That would be a radical new experience for them. So think about that even in our context today. Maybe you're a college student. And during your dead week, when the week that you're supposed to spend, you know, just like burning all candles and trying to prepare for your final exams or your projects, what if you took a day off and you just rested? What would your friends think? They're like, okay, let's study for this project. And you're like, oh, I already did that like yesterday. I'm just gonna rest today. What would they think? They would think you're crazy. But if they saw you truly experience and live out this like not being anxious through that, wouldn't they be curious? Or like think about, maybe your neighbors or your coworkers saw you intentionally take a day off instead of taking that day to move ahead or move forward, right? Taking advantage of that. Like, what if they saw you rested like that? What if people saw us rest as a community, maybe as house churches? Maybe someone comes and visits our house church, and their experience was people who were truly experiencing rest. What would that be like for them? Wouldn't that turn their heads, make people curious about who God is? Because, right, it's nothing magical just because we're experiencing something that's so restful for us. And that's what's turning people's heads. And third thing about observing Sabbath and why we should do it is that when we observe Sabbath, we're actually having this weekly recalibration of what defines a successful life. Israelites were asked to find their worth and value in their relationship with God who rescued them, and not in what they can produce or make on their own. Jesus agrees with this summarization of the Ten Commandments as loving God and loving others. That's how he summarizes the Ten Commandments. And so God's view of a successful life is all about right relationships. Love God and love others. Those are relationships. It's not about what we can make. It's not about how much money we have or we make or we will make, right? Like how famous we are or how many followers we have or how many likes we have on our posts. It's not about how many, properties you own, what kind of titles you get. It's not about that. God's view of success was right relationships, being in right relationship with God and being in right relationship with other people. And as we rest, as we intentionally stop, right? What's going to get you those things? What's going to get you wealth? What's going to get you fame or more followers? You got to put in the work. Why would you take a day rest if that was what was going to be driven for your success, right? And it's in our intentional stopping of our work that we're reminded that we find our worth not in what we do, but in who we are. And who we are in Christ is this perfect, unblemished children of God. And that's who we are. And that's where we find our worth and value. So Sabbath is a way for us to recalibrate that. And the fourth thing, so it's no surprise if all of the Ten Commandments was all about right relationship with God and others, that as we observe Sabbath, it grows our relationship with God and with others, right? How many of you said, I really, really do want to spend time with God, but I just can't find time, right? Probably nobody. Or how many of you said, I have all these people that I really want to like hang out with and spend more time with, but we just can't seem to find time together. We're playing phone tags and trying to match their schedule to ours, right? And it doesn't work. Like we've experienced that. But do you realize? So observing Sabbath was a communal thing. It wasn't like you take it on one day and the other person takes it on Tuesday. It wasn't like that. They were all supposed to observe it together as a community. So if you think about it, there's one day a week. If you truly observed it as a community, there's one day a week you have no excuse. When you ask someone, hey, let's hang out this day, they can't say, I'm busy. Right? Because like what are you doing? You're not working. You're not, what are you busy with? Like if we really observe this together, we would have one day where we would truly would have a freedom to be able to spend time with God and with other people. That sounds good to me, right? I mean, think of what about, imagine like entire San Luis Obispo, right? What if entire San Luis Obispo observed it? What comes to your mind? In my mind, it's like a day of like a crazy party, right? It's a celebration. It's a day-long celebration. What if people drive through San Luis Obispo on that day when everyone is enjoying God and enjoying each other, right? And I think that's like the glimpse of heaven that we get to experience and taste. And I love that at Journey, we actually taste this at regular basis. It sometimes happens on Sundays when you feel like you've been at church all day. We come in the morning, we have our service, and we have lunch together, and then next thing you know, people are like still hanging out at Boba, and then until like dinner time. I don't know. You just spend all day with people, and it's amazing, right? Or the times that we meet at house churches on Thursdays and Fridays, and we're having this time where we get to actually share lives with one another, and we get to create a break in our life and a rhythm where we get to actually invest in people. We experience these moments. And I know some of you house churches like stay way later than others. And I know like you take this to like a totally different level. But, right, but I feel like as a church we get to taste this. Like it's not that far from us. Right? So when we observe Sabbath, we're making this room for us to spend time with God and with each other. But we talked about, what Sabbath is, why we should observe it. Knowing those things don't make it any easier, right? So I'm going to share with you just 3 things why it's difficult for me, and you can kind of reflect on why is it difficult for you, right? First thing for me is that I find my identity in work. I'm a perfectionist and a workaholic, and I think I like to think that I don't have any limitations. That's just my natural first step. When a lot of my self-worth comes from my own works and what I can achieve, it's understandable that it's really difficult to rest. That's where my worth is coming from. I don't want to be worthless. Um, so I feel like I can be a harsh judge of myself. Whereas tell myself it's not good enough. It's not good enough, right? But I reflect back and I realize on some of those things, God was saying it is good enough. But I'm the one that's saying it's not good enough. God, you're wrong. I'll tell you, it's not good enough. Right? And that's so much of pride and ego talking. And when I was working as a motion graphic designer, I stayed late so many nights. I was late, and it's because I thought the thing that I made wasn't good enough, even though when my boss thought so, right? This type of value seeking from my own works, and it really started to have an impact in my own personal life, my physical life, my relationship with God, and my relationship with my wife. If I'm staying late at work every night because of because of my own ego saying that's not good enough, like what is that doing with my relationship at home, right? So I might have achieved something at work, but my relationship is broken. And that's not God's view of success. So it was hard for me. The second thing was this might be more relatable. I overwork and I don't rest when I don't know what God wants me to do. It's lack of discernment. I end up saying yes and yes and yes to everything because I don't know what to say no to, right? But, right, and when I was working as a motion designer again, right, there was a saying in our office, if you want to go home early, you do what your boss wants you to do, not what you want to do. If you trying to do what you want to do, you will stay so long. And you learn this lesson as you go on. You're like, you know what? I think today I'm just gonna do what he wants me to do or what she wants me to do, and I'm just gonna go home early. Like you learn that lesson as you go. You don't need to try to prove yourself. And it's in like I just didn't know what he wanted me to do, and it would have been so much more efficient if I just asked my boss. I just asked my boss, hey, what it is exactly that you want, and I can try to make that for you, right? Instead of making 20 different versions and hoping one of them he would like. It's not efficient. But it's all about discernment, right? It's about asking God what it is that you want, not what I think he wants me to do. So here's a quote by Shauna Nyquist that I came across that really sums it up well, and it really hits home for me. It says, "But you can't have yes without no." Another way to say it, if you're not careful with your yeses, you start to say no to some very important things without even realizing it. In my rampant yes, yes, yesing, I said no without intending to deep and slow connection built over years instead of moments. You said no without intending it. Can you relate to that? And in this, it's same with God. My inability to go to God and to ask Him, I just say yes and yes, yes to lots of things, and I don't even realize that I was saying no to this deep, like sweet relationship with God and experiencing God's presence and experiencing others. And I unintentionally said no to those things. And the third thing for me is just lack of trust. I just don't trust that God will provide for me when I'm resting. I have this like twisted view of God when I was growing up, distorted view where God was lacking and he was incompetent. That was one of the views, like messed up views that I had about God. So you can imagine if that's like your starting point, I feel like I just had to like overcompensate for God. It's like, oh, God's not gonna do that. I'll have to do it, right? God won't listen to that prayer. I'll just get it done myself. So it just makes me not trust God and just trying to overcompensate myself. I really had a hard time trusting that. You mean if I just rest here, that He will take care of it, that He will take care of me? That was really hard to believe. So when I don't trust God, it's really difficult to rest. But what about you? What prevents you from observing Sabbath or resting? And if you feel comfortable, you just turn to your neighbor and ask them, like, do you relate with one of those three things, or maybe you have your own reason that makes it difficult. Just spend a minute, ask them, and if you're watching on YouTube and you're brave, you can put it on the chat. Yeah, ask them. What prevents you? Okay, so I hope. What's up? Oh, okay. I can help. Yeah, after. Um, so I just want to talk about application. So I hope you got to at least share one thing. At least think about for you what's the thing that makes it difficult. But the application is really simple. The application is let's try it. Let's try to have this rest and the rhythm of rest at least once, right? I'm not saying like have this elaborate plan of how you're gonna have weekly rest. I hope that we all get there. But if you've never done it, just try once, right? Like have this once Sabbath rest where you get to experience God and enjoy other people. And Sabbath was meant to be observed as a community. It was a command given to a community, not individuals. So I just have few options that you can think about that you can observe communally. One of them is with the people that you live with, your family members or your housemates. Identify and commit a time this week where everyone in your house can be fully present and spend some unstructured time with them, enjoying God and enjoying each other. You can right. It's not descriptive, so it's not prescriptive. So you can figure out what that looks like for you, but have that conversation with them, right? And maybe that's a time where you get to experience God's generosity as a family or as a household, and you can share that generosity with other people. Or in house church, maybe it's God's invitation for us to really commit to meeting weekly, to be able to work really hard and sacrifice so that we can meet on Thursdays and Fridays, and it's the prioritizing of that time to be with each other. Or maybe it's as a house church, you can plan a time to get away, have a retreat or vacation as a house church where you can break this rhythm of life and you can enjoy God, maybe God's creation and one another during that time. So yeah, I think it's just my encouragement is to let's just really apply it. If you have been rescued by God and you have eternal gratitude towards God, then I think it's His invitation for us to experience this rest and exercise our freedom, to be His people this way. Um, in closing, I'll just read Matthew 11:28 through 30. So receive this together. Jesus says, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light." He says, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest." Let's pray together. Lord, may we stop resisting your invitation for us to experience rest. May we stop getting burnt out as we try to achieve our definition of successful life with our own strength and try to find our worth in what we do. May we surrender to this eternal rest that we get to taste today and to experience it today. And may this lesson that we learn in the pandemic that you have given to us, may it truly transform us, where this regular rhythm of rest becomes a natural part of who we are. Even if afterwards, after the pandemic is over, that we would be able to live as your free children of God. And may that be so in the power of Jesus Christ, who made it all possible. Amen. Let's sing together.